Yep.
I think we ended up in your gym and we ended up having a conversation about Tony Halama and that fight. And you guys told him not, don't run at this guy. He's, and that's exactly what he did.
Randy, the whole thing is funny. I want to give you like a little context, like for entertainment's sake. It's like you and I were talking a bit before we went live here, and we talked about the internet, the influence the internet has had on the world. So back then, the internet was still kind of like in its nascent stages. People it didn't spread the way it spread these days. And Tony trained. We booked the guy 3 months in advance for that fight. That was a long lead up for the UFC those days. Like you yourself said, you had 3 weeks. Well, during that 3 months, there were 4 different opponents. And I don't know if you heard the legend of this or not. The first guy, I don't remember who it was, got injured. Yeah. And at this point, the internet picked up this story about Tony supposedly murdering people with his bare hands in prison, and was let out for some technicality. It made no sense. But in any case, it started to catch. And then Jason Farron was booked. Jason read the story and dropped out of the fight. So there were 2 opponents down. And now the internet really picked up. Oh my God, everyone's afraid of this guy. Nobody wants to fight him. And you remember, this is going to sound almost sacrilegious for me to say this to you, but back in those days when very few of us, myself included, really didn't know much at all, to us, the guys that were the biggest, meanest looking guys were the toughest guys on earth. And Tony Halm was like the poster child for that movie.
Yeah, he was.
He was a big, scary looking mother, and he acted the part too, man. Boy,
yeah, he did.
And so everyone's now afraid of this guy. And the McCulley brothers and they were involved with my gym, and if you remember Sean and McCulley in Orange County, we set up a 90-day training regimen for Tony. He showed up one time for 90 days. Showed up one time in 90 days. That one time he showed up, he tried to muscle a kid out of a flying armbar, and he popped his elbow. And to his credit, he's like, "Oh, just a small scratch, no problem. I will fight." Well, Randy, this is after him making every excuse in the book why he couldn't train. Oh, too tired. I beat up 10 people in the street last night. I mean, it was one thing after another.
Wow.
And we almost started to believe it, although we didn't. And basically, we figured we're in trouble. I mean, if this guy is fighting somebody real, we're probably in trouble. And then that day, Tony being Tony, forgot to bring a mouthpiece. So who do we borrow a mouthpiece from? Your manager and trainer, Rico Ciparelli, who I've become acquainted with. And so I actually walked into the training room where you guys were training to borrow the mouthpiece. So I saw you for like 3 minutes. And I go back, I go, God, we're probably in trouble here, man. He's small. I mean, compared to Tony. I mean,
Tony was huge.
6'5", 300. Tony, don't run at him. And of course, he ran straight at you in slow motion. What he said, though, he goes, he could never take me down. He's not strong enough. Tony, he'll take you down.
Called me a Smurf.
He called you a Smurf.
He kept calling me a Smurf.
He's a little Smurf. You remember that, right? And we're like, Tony, he'll take you down. He'll go to your belly, and he'll put a choke on you. Oh, he can never choke me out. He's too little of a Smurf. There's no way. I mean, it was one thing after another with this guy. So I mean, we all know what happens. I have to ask you this. I heard a rumor that week and years later that apparently, this could be total made up BS, but apparently your mother saw something on TV about Tony Halman and asked you.
Fight night. That was
okay.
actually fight night. So obviously the pay-per-view was coming on. I had called my mom when I got it approved by Dutch Bachman to go do this show. She already knew I was going to Puerto Rico to compete in the Pan Am Championships. Literally on the way back, 5 days later was my first fight on the way back from Puerto Rico. So they knew. My brother-in-law and my sister and my mom all lived in the same neighborhood up there. And they all got together because they were going to get the pay-per-view and watch the fight. So my brother-in-law was right up next to the TV like this, watching, the interviews, and Tony Halman comes on the screen and he jumps and comes back. And Tony, of course, talking like Tony did. Yep. Oh, I'm going to rip his arms off. Yeah. If that doesn't stop him, then I will rip his legs off. And he just kept going and going. And my mom just started bawling. Here's this 300-pound guy talking about how he's going to dismantle her son. And she just started bawling. Of course, it didn't go that way, but that was a true story. Absolutely, on fight night, my brother-in-law freaked out. He's like, "Oh my God, that guy's a monster!"
Wow,
And then
I had heard that. I've been verified here for me at least for the first time. I always wondered about that. You know, Tony we made him hide in his room up until the fight time. So we figured our only advantage at that point was psychological. And we're going, we do your interview. He goes, should I shoot it or should I work it? I'm like, dude, just stay in work mode. You know, as a pro wrestler, you know how to cut a promo for sure. He was good. Yeah, so that's what he came up with. Like, rip his arm off. If that doesn't work, quote unquote, I will rip his fucking head off. I remember that. Yes.
It was something. And I had never heard of him or seen him anywhere. I wasn't a pro wrestling guy. I didn't know who Ludvig Borga was. I didn't know who Tony Holloman was. We heard he was a boxing champion from Finland and that he'd been doing some pro wrestling and that he was a huge guy. But until we stepped on the scale in the lobby at that Holiday Inn, that was the first time I'd ever laid eyes on him. There was no video. There was no, it wasn't like I got to prep for him or know exactly where he'd been, what he'd done, what his skill sets were, any of that. It was literally flying blind.
And I imagine he wasn't very friendly. He probably wasn't very friendly when you met, I would imagine.
No, he wasn't a gregarious, outgoing guy, at least not to me. I mean, we were going to get ready to compete, and the other heavyweights were there. We were all weighing in at the same time. So, and I'm looking at him and Stephen Graham. I'm like, man, what the hell did I get myself into here?
Stephen was a big guy too. Yeah.
Yeah, 290, great, good football player from one of the Carolina colleges, and training under that Green Beret and extension fighting, whatever the heck extension fighting is.
But it's probably more effective than Hawaiian bone breaking, though. But right? I don't know.
Hard to say, honestly. I mean, what's a pit fight? Everybody said, "Oh, hey, Tank Abbott's got 300 pit fights." I'm like, what the hell is a pit fight?
Oh my gosh. So when you were facing off across from Tony, do you remember what were in your thoughts at that point?
Absolutely. I wasn't sure if I needed to climb that fence and get the hell out of there. He stood across the cage in his 300-pound frame and just held his arms out like that. He had a tattoo on the inside of his arm of a barcode.
Yeah.
And just this massive guy. And I'm like, what the? I had to really suck it up. And, I had a game plan. Rico was in my corner. We knew what we thought he wanted to do. And sure enough, he did exactly that. He came running at me in boxing stance, ready to rip my head off, and just literally fed right into the double, allowed me to take him down and put him on the deck. I had just learned in that 5 days in Atlanta before we went up to Augusta what a knee on belly was. I mean, I literally had just learned it. So I scrambled around him, tried putting knee on belly, hit him once. He rolled over, gave me his back. I went right into college wrestling mode, put the hooks in, and secured a basic choke. I didn't even know how to lace in a proper rear naked choke at that time. I just squeezed and he tapped. So
pretty fast.
Yeah.
Pretty fast. And were you relieved afterwards? Were you like celebratory?
The whole thing was surreal. It was surreal to me. I mean, I've been a wrestler since, like I said, since I was 10. So you don't have all that fanfare and people reaching over the fence and trying to yard on your clothes and scream. I mean, it was a frenzy walking out of that tunnel. So that was surreal in and of itself.